Everybody, great to have you along. Hockey Night Online, great way to get your weekend started. David Amber and, of course, senior writer over at cbcsports.ca, Mike Brophy. And I guess it's all Leafs all the time because there's a faint hope that they're going to make the postseason. They helped themselves out, though, a little bit yesterday, Brof. We'll get to that in just a matter of moments. Interactive show. You got to contact Mike Brophy. You can contact me very simply. Get on Twitter, at Hockey Night, at David Amber, at Hockey Brof, hashtag Hockey Night. Or you Facebook users, check us out there as well. Last night was a big night for the Leafs. Fair enough to say.
Unbelievable game.
It was like a playoff game.
Well, it was like a playoff game from a year ago when they had a lead and almost blew it.
Yeah, the only difference was the ending was a little bit happier for Leaf fans. A 4-3 overtime win courtesy of the Nazem Kadri goal. Gives Toronto the win over Boston. Boston overcame a 3-1 deficit in the third. Toronto gets the 2 points. Columbus also won a 2-0 shutout over Philadelphia. So there are your up-to-the-minute Eastern Conference standings. Again, the Leafs with 4 games to play, starting Saturday at home against Winnipeg. Then they finish up with 3 road games. But let's talk a little bit from our viewer question standpoint. What is out there asking us questions? And we have this one coming from Linda Warad. She wants to know, I sure hope Bernier won't be out too long. And we didn't get a chance to mention Jonathan Bernier injures himself in the third period last night. Again, a lower body injury. That's all we know, is getting an MRI today on Friday. What can you tell us?
Well, the one thing I would say is that it looked quite serious. He wasn't able to put any pressure on his leg as he left the ice. And let's just say for a second that he's out for a week. Well, that's the season, their whole season. So it doesn't look good for the Toronto Maple Leafs and for Jonathan Bernier. You know, he clearly is the #1 goaltender on the hockey team. He settles them down. They seem to play a more confident, relaxed game when Jonathan Bernier is in the net. I think a lot of that has to do, David, with the fact that he doesn't give up many rebounds. He really absorbs the puck well. And then you couple that with the fact that when the puck is around his net, he's able to play it a lot better with his stick than James Reimer does. So I just believe that the Maple Leafs are a much more comfortable hockey team when he's in net. The reality of the situation is, if he's got a serious injury, James Reimer is their goaltender moving forward. They've got 4 games left, and they're going to have to ride Reimer and hope that he responds.
Yeah, and remember, Bernier missed 5 games in March with a groin injury. We're not sure if it's the leg or the groin, but certainly a lower body injury. And it's worth noting, a little update here, it's Friday. He's not at the Leafs practice. They have a 23-year-old goaltender playing in the backup net, a 23-year-old you've never heard of. I've never heard of him. He plays at Ryerson University, so it's not looking very likely that Jonathan Bernier will be ready to return tomorrow on Hockey Night in Canada versus Winnipeg. You mentioned James Reimer. That's our next question. Mohammed Siri wants to know, now everyone loves Reimer because he played a few minutes. What is with these goalies? And that's in reference to Reimer coming in last night under siege. Comes in a 3-2 game. Boston on the power play. Boston did get the equalizer, tied it at 3, but Reimer played pretty darn good. It has been a rough ride for James Reimer. Can he handle the load these next 4 games? They're all must-wins.
You know, it's funny. Everybody seems to think, yes, he can handle the load. I think it's a bit of a gray area. He came in last night and did exactly what the Maple Leafs hoped he would do. He gave them a chance to win. He faced 11 shots. He made 10 saves in 14 minutes and 29 seconds ice time. That was his first save of the game with the CN Tower, better known as Zdeno Chara, standing in front of him, and he actually caught the puck. One reporter jokes and says all the time that he uses a bedpan for a trapper because the puck seems to bounce off it all the time. James, to me, never looks as comfortable as Bernier does, but it's about making stops, and he came in last night and made stops. He's got a big opportunity now. You know, the team's going to ride him. When I talked to the players in the dressing room after the game, to a man, they believe James Reimer can come in and get the job done. So if your players believe in you, or at least they give the impression they believe in you, that's at least a step in the right direction.
Yeah, from the doghouse to the penthouse for James Reimer yesterday. Of note, it is worth noting, he didn't start. He got the win last night, but he didn't start that game. He has lost his last 7 starts dating back to January. So he'll be in there, chances are, starting against his hometown team, the Winnipeg Jets. Again, these are must-win games for the Leafs down the stretch. They also need some help from Columbus losing some games down the stretch. How about another viewer question that rolls our way courtesy of Stephen Waxman? Wants to know what's going on between Kadri and Carlisle. Of course, Kadri scored the overtime goal last night, but he did look so unhappy on the bench. Mike?
Well, of course he looks unhappy on the bench because he's been relegated to the 4th line center. And if you look at the Toronto Maple Leaf centers, Bozak is firmly entrenched as the #1 center. David Bolin has come back and really played well. Then you've got Jay McClement, who's a checking center, and Randy Carlisle's been using checking line much more in recent games. So where does that leave Nazem Kadri? It leaves him on the 4th line. Coaches control very little, but one thing they can do to inspire a player is control their ice time. Nazem Kadri has had his ice time cut back. Quite frankly, I don't think he's responded very well. Hey, that's a beautiful goal in overtime. Nazem Kadri has great hands, and he showed that there. But Nazem Kadri, too often, the criticism in his game is that he goes out on the ice sometimes and his feet aren't moving. I think he's got to be his best. He's got to be a bit of a lowercase Doug Gilmour in that he's got to go out and be physical. He's got to make plays. He's got to play with emotion. We haven't seen that from him. Now, the flip side is he's the third leading scorer on the hockey team. Yeah. He's got 19 goals and he's only 23 years old. So I don't know if I'd be ready to pull the chute on Nazem Kadri yet. I think there's a lot of ability there. I just don't believe that Nazem Kadri has really found the inner Nazem Kadri in that he hasn't found that desire to be excellent every game. Sometimes he relies too much on his natural ability and he doesn't try to take his game to the next level.
Great offensive ability. The question is the consistency. Will he find that consistent mark where you can trust him at both ends of the ice? That's something Randy Carlyle's been talking about. Here's the thing. If the Leafs make the playoffs, it might mask what is a major problem for this team, and that's their defense. They give up a ton of shots. So this question relates to that. Miles F46 wants to know, what and who do you need to add to a mid-first round pick in order for the Leafs to go out and get a top-end D? And that's the thing. You have to imagine, regardless if it's Dave Nonis or someone else out there running this team this offseason, the big objective is going to be to shore up the blue line. What would it take to get a top-line defenseman?
That's a really tough one, Dave, because I think with the Leafs contract situation, a lot of their guys just aren't movable. What can you get for David Clarkson, who signed that long-term deal and has not played very well? David Boland's a question mark, but he's going to be an unrestricted free agent anyways. To get a top-end D, I think is going to be difficult for the Leafs. However, I look at this scenario. The Edmonton Oilers continue to be a lousy hockey team in spite of the fact they have all these young guns. Craig McTavish said when he took over the team that he was going to move, make a dramatic move. How about moving a Ryan Nugent-Hopkins or a Jordan Eberle? And what would it take to move one of those guys? Well, it might take a young Jake Gardiner. Jake Gardner's a kid who shows that he can control the game, he can slow it down, he can speed it up, he's got offensive upside. Dallas Aikens had him with the Toronto Marlies, so he's well acquainted with what Jake Gardner's upside is. I would think if you put together a package and included Jake Gardner, that would be something that the Edmonton Oilers might be interested in. They've fallen in love with all these young forwards of theirs, and they've been very reluctant to part with one, but I think not making the playoffs again has them in a very desperate mode right now, and they're going to have to move somebody, whether it's an Eberle or a Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. Somebody's got to go.
Yeah, but what about the Leafs blue line? That doesn't shore up their blue line. That's another.
That's the problem because of the contracts. I mean, the one guy you could possibly move, and I hear is Dion Phaneuf. Dion Phaneuf's an Edmonton native. Yeah. He signed a 7-year contract extension, but I think if you move the pieces around, he might look good on the Edmonton Oilers blue line. Personally, I haven't given up on Dion Phaneuf. I think there's way too much upside there, but when I listen to the fans in the stand, it sounds to me like, boy, his popularity's hit an all-time low.
It's tough, and Dion Phaneuf, remember, he has to shoulder the load of so many tough assignments against the other team's top lines and play so many minutes. It's a very difficult night in, night out for number 3 to lead the way for the Leafs. And another question, and this one relates to the last question we had. What major changes do you guys think the Leafs will make if they don't qualify for the postseason? And that comes in from Mo Jaber. And I said already, I think they're going to try and shore up their defense. I think they're comfortable with Bernier as their number 1 goalie. They're certainly comfortable with their top flight of forwards. The Kessel line's been fantastic. It's the blue line and the depth or lack thereof that I think is really the problem that belies the Leafs.
Well, if you're looking for major changes, I don't believe Dave Nonis is in trouble. But if they don't make the playoffs, then you have to look at the coach. I'm not saying that I think Randy Carlyle should be fired, but I think it's something Tim Leiweke will look at. Nazem Kadri's not safe. I think James Reimer is done with the Maple Leafs after the season. He's a restricted free agent, and I think with Bernier being the number 1 guy, he's not going to be back. Mason Raymond, the Leafs won't be able to afford him. They signed him on a $1 million deal, and he's going to get a big pay raise. Jake Gardiner is a guy who could be in play. Boy, oh boy, when you talk about trading a 23-year-old defenseman, it scares me a little bit, especially with his offensive upside. But to get something, you've got to give something. David Boland's another guy. Do you re-sign David Boland? I really like him. I think he's got the leadership. He's won 2 Stanley Cups. He's a guy that I think can greatly influence the players in your room. But David Boland's going to be looking for a big payday, and it's a risky sign. I think he's come back pretty well after that serious injury to his ankle. But I think there's going to be a lot of changes in the offseason, whether or not the Leafs make the playoffs or not.
Yeah, especially if they don't make the playoffs, because then there's going to
yes.
be absolute panic in the city of Toronto. And you know why? It's because it's been a long history of ineptitude
Yes.
over the last 4 decades or so, which leads us to our last question here. Why have the Leafs been inept for the last 45 years? This is a family show, and it's also not a long show. I don't know if we have time to address everything that's taken place over the last 45 years, but it's worth noting they have the longest drought of not winning a Stanley Cup in the National Hockey League. And in that time, surprisingly, they have never been to the Stanley Cup final. So it's one thing not winning a cup. They haven't even won their conference, which is kind of shocking.
It really is. I guess you'd have to point the finger to bad management. There's been some questionable management moves from 67 on all the way through. And over the years, there's been a lot of bad drafting. I frankly think in the last couple of years, the Leafs have done a better job of drafting. And whenever I think about this particular issue, I always think it gets back to one thing. Whether they win or lose, that building is sold out every night. They know they just have to open the doors and they are going to have sellouts. That's not the same in most markets in the National Hockey League. And I think there's been a real level of comfort. Does that mean the current management team feels safe and they don't want to win? Well, obviously not, because I think they work very hard to try to build a winner. But just knowing that regardless of whether you finish first or last, when you open the doors, it's a sellout, I think it takes away that level of desperation.
Do you believe in curses? Because I talk to Leaf fans all the time and say, we're cursed, you know, the high stick on Gilmore in '93, and they bring up all these moments that have happened over the last 40 years, and kind of like the Cubs, the lovable losers, the Cubs.
I leave curses to Buffalo Bill fans with wide right and everything.
Buffalo Sabres
fans.
Buffalo
Sabres
too.
Skate in the crease.
All right, well, hopefully you've got your fill of Leafs news. It's, again, going to be a huge weekend here on Hockey Night in Canada. We have the Jets and the Leafs rolling your way Saturday night. The Leafs, of course, mathematically alive, but quite clearly they have to run the table and get some help with teams playing Columbus and Detroit. Check us out at Hockey Night, at David Amber, at Hockey Brophy. Hashtag Hockey Night. Check us out also on Facebook. We're going to see you back here Monday. I'm sure the playoff picture will be much more crystallized by then. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next time. Hockey Night Online.